Hi everybody. I'm just going to read this document that I wrote. I want to read it so that people that don't like to read can hear it. So I'm just going to do this right away, see if I can get it in on a YouTube video. Okay? This is good news. The American Church of Religious Freedom is the name that I have given to the religion of the American people that has existed undefined within the two self-evident truths proclaimed on July 4th, 1776 in the Declaration of American Independence. 234 years ago, this July 4th, our nation was, as Abe Lincoln said in his Gettysburg Address, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Out of this famous proposition of equality, authored by Thomas Jefferson, emerged the co-principle of dynamic force and direction that states unequivocally in Jefferson's words that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Ever since that day, the phrase all men are created equal has basically piqued the minds of the great thinkers worldwide as to exactly what Jefferson meant by that. And likewise, probably every one of American citizens have at one time or another thought about, what equality means in our country. Went through the whole civil rights union deal back in the 60s, trying to figure that out. What is equal? And, Americans know that equality is tied in with the unalienable rights, the endowment by God of unalienable rights. But, some Americans are unable to see their freedom under the present form of government. I mean, not the form so much, but the administration, the people that are operating. In this present day, the American people are very much different from the people of 1776. America in those days, Americans, they were all Christians. And belief in God was basically their primary fortitude. This is how they were able to do what they did, is because they had faith in God. And specifically, they believed in Jesus Christ. I mean, the 13 colonies were possessions of Great Britain, and all of the people that were British subjects. I mean, ever since Henry VIII was proclaimed the head of the church in England in 1532, they had gone through a whole series of political and religious wars, revolutions, things like that in England. And a lot of it was the turmoil that was created with the Reformation, Lutheran, Calvin, and then Henry VIII and him making his own religion. Actually, just really took back control from the Pope. But the net result is that they had gone through all that, and the people that were coming over here were a product of that. And the reason they wanted to come over here is they wanted to practice their religion the way they wanted it, without a whole bunch of stuff going on. And during that period of time, the British were very busy overseas in their own territory, and so America really got to grow up for a while without heavy influence, and this is how they developed their own, basically, self-government. And so the Americans of that day, they all believed in Jesus Christ. That's the bottom line. They just differed as to how they practiced that belief, what their ideas were. Okay? And Jefferson wrote the Declaration of American Independence under those social conditions, and that's very important to understand that when he's writing, the conditions under which he's writing, who's his audience? There's 56 men that signed that Declaration of Independence. Where are their heads at? What are they thinking? Okay? I'll tell you something. Everybody then knew that Jefferson was writing about the God who raised Jesus from the dead, when he used the word created equal. And everybody knew that Jefferson's reference to the Creator, again, who endows us with certain unalienable rights, points to the Bible verse in Genesis 1:27, which says, And God created man to his own image. To the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So that statement is, they're all Christians. They're just not going to talk about it specifically, because Jefferson and I guess all of them agreed that that was your own business. How you wanted to do your religion was your own business. So they weren't going to ask you, what you want to tell people, fine, but they weren't going to bug you about it. So that's how they didn't mention the name of Jesus in this document. It wasn't necessary. And I don't think it's necessary now if you just use your head. They certainly weren't any other religion other than Christian, and they weren't talking about any other God other than the God that raised Jesus from the dead. And, if you say, well, you're talking about abstract God and stuff, no, I'm sorry, that's not the case. 56 men representing us here now, and all Americans through all time, at that historical Congress in Philadelphia, signed their names in a unanimous agreement with the Declaration of American Independence authored by Thomas Jefferson. By the agreement of these 56 men, we, all who claim to be Americans, are each and all committed to rest the strength of our nation directly upon belief in the one God who raised Jesus of Nazareth from the dead, and on the belief that this one God endows each individual person with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's pretty simple. That's what everybody was signing. And they're all Christian. So this is kind of, they were so pressured. They didn't know how amazing this thing was, and neither did Jefferson. But I suspect he had an inkling, because he was a very spiritual and religious man. In 1786, he wrote the Virginia Assembly's bill for religious freedom, and that is a very important document in the construction of our Constitution. So he was talking about religious freedom, the freedom that we have, life, liberty, pursuit, happiness. The freedom that comes from unalienable rights is primarily and first and foremost the freedom of religion, because you can classify everything that you're doing as your religion. That's what freedom of religion is. That's what unalienable rights are. They're not defined, but they're not limited. And the only limitation you have as a citizen is if you go and basically break the common law of man, which is you violate someone else's personal space in some way, shape, or form. Either you go and steal from them, or you steal from them in some way, or you cause them some kind of harm, or interfere with their freedom. That's common sense. And Jefferson figured, well, that's all we really need. We just need the truth. We don't need a bunch of stuff. If you look closely, you will see that the two self-evident truths are a direct reflection of the two great commandments that Jesus gave when he was questioned about natural law, and that was in Matthew 22:36-40. Just listen to these words, and at the same time think about the two self-evident truths. Okay, just listen. Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus said to him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with thy whole heart, and with thy whole soul, and with thy whole mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like to this, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. It is perfectly clear to me that Thomas Jefferson was inspired by God to translate the two great commandments of Jesus Christ into the law of freedom upon which this great nation of America rests, which is right there, the two self-evident truths. That's what our nation rests upon.